The late afternoon sun spilled through the dusty windows of Milford's old country diner, a quiet little place where locals nursed their coffee and gossiped about everything except their own lives. The bell above the door jingled as a man walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed simply in a faded jacket, dark glasses, and a low-brimmed hat. He looked like someone passing through town, not someone planning to stay. He moved silently, choosing a booth in the corner. No introduction, no eye contact. Just calm, controlled presence. The waitress, Nora, walked over nervously, unsure what to make of him. "Coffee?" she asked. The man nodded once, his voice low and steady. "Please." Across the room, Officer Briggs slouched on a stool, halfway through his third plate of chili fries. The town knew him well, loud, insecure, and a man who mistook his badge for a crown. When he saw the stranger take a seat, something petty lit up in his eyes. "Look at this guy," Briggs muttered loudly, elbowing the man next to him. "Thinks he's some kind of tough hero." The stranger ignored him, quietly stirring sugar into his coffee. That only bothered Briggs more. He stood up, boots thudding across the floor, and stopped at the stranger's table. "Hey," Briggs snapped, "I'm talking to you." The diner went quiet. Even the humming AC seemed to hold its breath. The stranger didn't look up. He simply lifted his fork, taking another bite of his meal with complete calm. "You deaf or just stupid?" Briggs barked. A couple sitting nearby lowered their heads, trying not to get involved. Finally, the stranger spoke, soft, controlled, almost gentle. "I'm just trying to eat." Briggs smirked. "Oh, you'll eat, all right." Then, in one sudden motion, he reached for the plate, piled high with food, and dumped it over the stranger's head, letting gravy, mashed potatoes, and vegetables cascade down his face and jacket. Gasps exploded around the diner. Nora covered her mouth. A child at a nearby table whispered, "Mom, why did he do that?" The stranger slowly set down his fork. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move fast. He just wiped the food from his face with one calm hand. His silence was more intimidating than any shout. And what happened next made the entire diner freeze. The diner was frozen in shock. For a long moment, no one moved. Even Officer Briggs seemed surprised at his own boldness. The sloppy mixture of mashed potatoes and gravy slid down the stranger's collar, dripping onto the table and floor. But the man didn't react, not with anger, not with fear. He simply breathed out slowly, as if forcing his spirit to stay calm. Nora, the waitress, rushed forward with a towel. "Oh my God, sir, I'm so sorry." Briggs blocked her with one outstretched arm. "Don't touch him. He needs to learn some manners." The stranger lifted his gaze for the first time. His eyes, cold, unreadable, peeked out from under the brim of his hat. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look offended. He looked disappointed. "I told you," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to eat my meal." "And I told you," Briggs shot back, leaning closer. "This is my town. You don't sit here looking like some big-shot drifter without answering my questions." "Your town?" the stranger repeated, voice barely above a whisper. "Or your playground." A few customers stifled gasps. Briggs' nostrils flared. He slammed both hands on the table, causing leftover utensils to clatter onto the floor. "Who do you think you are?" Briggs growled. "You roll in here with your sunglasses and your silence. What? You think you're hard? You think you're a tough guy?" The stranger reached for a napkin and wiped his face calmly. "No," he answered. "I think you're having a bad day, and taking it out on the wrong person." The diner murmured with quiet shock. Nobody ever spoke to Briggs like that. The officer straightened, jaw ticking as anger rose like steam. "Stand up," Briggs ordered. "Now." The stranger didn't move. Briggs yanked the napkin out of his hand, throwing it on the floor. "I said stand up." Still, the man didn't move. He simply stared at Briggs with a stillness that somehow made the officer even more agitated. One man at the counter whispered to Nora, "He's either the bravest guy I've ever seen, or completely insane." Nora swallowed. "No, he's something else." Briggs grabbed the stranger's jacket and lifted him slightly off the seat. But even with the effort, Briggs grunted. The stranger was solid, like a wall disguised in fabric. "You're resisting an officer," Briggs hissed. "I can drag you out by your hair if I want." "Hurting people makes you feel powerful?" the stranger asked calmly. "Or just less small?" Briggs' face turned red instantly. He shoved the stranger back down and stepped away, pacing in front of the booth like a frustrated bull. "You think you can come into my diner and disrespect me? Huh, me." A teenager pulled out his phone and started recording. Others followed. "Put the phone away," Briggs barked. But they didn't. They kept filming, sensing this was bigger than a simple argument. Briggs turned back to the stranger. "Tell me your name." "Now." The stranger picked up his coffee cup. "I don't want trouble." "That wasn't a request," Briggs snapped. "Tell me your damn name." The stranger set the cup down again. "You don't need my name. You just need to calm down." Briggs slammed his fist on the table so hard the plates rattled. "Calm down? You want me to calm down?" The whole diner jumped at the volume. A little girl began to cry. Her father stood and glared at Briggs. "Officer, that's enough. He didn't do anything." Briggs pointed at him. "Sit down before I put you in cuffs too." The father opened his mouth to argue, but his wife tugged him back down, terrified. Briggs turned back toward the stranger with a smirk. "See? They listen. Everyone listens. Except you. For now," the man replied quietly. Briggs reached for the man's hat, intending to yank it off, but the stranger's hand shot up, faster than anyone expected. With 2 fingers, he gently stopped Briggs' hand midair. Not violently, not aggressively, just firmly. Briggs froze. Everyone in the diner stared. The stranger spoke softly, but there was a weight behind his words. "Don't touch the hat." Briggs pulled back, shaken for a moment, but his ego wouldn't let him retreat. He barked into his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup. Possible hostile suspect at Old Country Diner." "Hostile?" the stranger repeated. "Because I'm eating lunch?" Briggs leaned close, sneering. "No, because you won't bow." Nora stepped forward again, trembling. "Officer Briggs, please." "Shut up, Nora," Briggs roared. She flinched and backed away, tears forming. Briggs wasn't done. He grabbed the stranger's coffee cup and threw it against the wall, letting it shatter. The man never flinched. "Last chance," Briggs warned. "Tell me who you are, or I'll make sure you regret ever stepping foot in my town." The stranger lowered his hands slowly. He sighed. "As I said," he murmured, "I was just trying to eat." But there was something in his voice now, something that made every hair in the diner stand up. Something dangerous, something controlled, something Briggs should have noticed. Instead, he smirked. "Oh yeah? And what are you going to do if I don't let you?" The stranger didn't answer. He didn't have to. The storm was coming, and Briggs had no idea how badly he was provoking the wrong man. Before things explode even more, tell us from which country and city you're watching this story. The diner's atmosphere had transformed into something electric, dangerous, alive. Every eye stayed locked on the stranger, still sitting calmly with food stains drying on his jacket. Every breath in the room felt held. Every second stretched longer than the last. Officer Briggs paced like an unstable fuse, ready to explode at the slightest spark. You could see the conflict building in him, anger wrestling with something else he didn't want to admit, fear. He jabbed a finger toward the stranger. "Stand up." The stranger didn't move. His hands rested flat on the table, palms relaxed, expression unreadable. Briggs lost whatever patience he had left. He grabbed the stranger by the collar again, jerking him halfway out of his seat. Chairs scraped loudly. A couple of teenagers jumped back. The stranger let himself be pulled, but still didn't resist. His boots barely left the floor. "Why aren't you fighting back?" Briggs yelled, spittle flying. "Why aren't you defending yourself? Huh? You scared? You weak?" The stranger's voice came slow, calm, almost sad. "I don't fight bullies. They're already losing." A shocked wave went through the diner. Someone whispered, "Oh man, he's done." Briggs trembled with rage. He pushed the stranger back down hard, causing the table to shake. He then reached for his baton, pulling it halfway from its holster. The metallic scrape sent terror across the room. "Officer, please," Nora cried. Briggs snapped at her, "Stay back." The stranger finally raised his head fully. His eyes met Briggs, steady, sharp, unblinking. "You pull that baton," he said quietly, "and you won't like what comes next." It wasn't a threat. It was a prediction. Briggs laughed loudly to cover the crack in his confidence. "Oh, look at that. Now he talks big." But the stranger didn't blink. "And you'll regret it," he said simply. Briggs lunged forward, pressing the baton against the stranger's shoulder as if testing him, daring him. The room fell silent enough to hear the ceiling fan turning. The stranger exhaled once, slow. "Walk away," he advised again. Briggs leaned in, pressing harder. "Make me." The stranger remained still as stone. A customer finally stood up, an older truck driver with trembling hands. "That's enough, Briggs. Everyone sees what you're doing. You're going to get yourself in trouble." Briggs spun around. "Sit down before I put you in cuffs." "No," the man said, voice cracking but determined. "You sit down." Gasps echoed. The old man immediately regretted it, but Briggs had turned back to the stranger, rage boiling over. "You're making me look stupid," Briggs shouted. The stranger answered evenly. "You don't need my help for that." The diner erupted in small whispers and stifled laughter. Briggs snapped. He shoved the table violently aside, plates flying and shattering across the floor. Customers screamed as glass scattered everywhere. The stranger stood slowly as the table slid away, rising to his full height. And for the first time, Briggs realized just how big he truly was. The stranger towered over him, not just in size, but presence. Calm, controlled, dangerous without effort. Briggs gripped the baton like a lifeline. "Sit down." The stranger didn't even twitch. The room watched, breathless. The tension was suffocating. "You really want this fight?" Briggs barked. "Right here? Right now?" "No," the man said softly. "You do." Briggs swung. But the stranger didn't block, didn't dodge, didn't raise a hand. The baton missed by an inch, because Briggs himself hesitated. He couldn't do it. Not fully. Something inside him finally screamed that this wasn't a normal man, not someone he could push around. Briggs stepped back, confused by his own fear. The stranger took one single step forward. Just one. And Briggs stumbled backward as if shoved by a hurricane. "You feel that?" the stranger asked. Briggs blinked. "What?" "That's your conscience. It's been asleep. A long time." A few people quietly clapped. Others murmured prayers. The diner was turning against Briggs completely. He pointed the baton at the stranger with shaking hands. "Stay back. I swear I'll." "You won't," the stranger cut in. Briggs swallowed hard. What are you?" he blurted, voice cracking. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, just enough for Briggs to feel the pressure of real danger. The kind only a trained, powerful man could create without lifting a single finger. "Last chance," the stranger warned quietly. "Stop this before I have to stop you." Briggs wanted to swing again, wanted to prove something, anything, but his arm wouldn't lift. The whole diner saw it. They saw the fear. They saw the truth. Briggs had picked the wrong man to humiliate. If you were standing there as a witness, would you step in or stay silent? Comment your answer below. Officer Briggs had never felt this kind of humiliation before. His badge always protected him. His uniform always gave him power. People always shrank back when he barked, always obeyed when he threatened. But tonight, a silent man with food on his jacket had undone him without even lifting a hand. The diner's lights flickered slightly, adding to the tension. Briggs stepped backward, breath shallow, baton still trembling in his grip. "What are you?" he whispered again. The stranger didn't move, didn't answer, didn't break eye contact. He didn't need to. The truth was already tightening around Briggs like a noose. Nora, trembling behind the counter, whispered, "He's not normal, is he?" The truck driver answered her quietly. No, ma'am, that's a trained man. I've seen soldiers with that kind of stillness. Men who've seen things. Briggs heard it, and it only fueled his panic. I am the officer here, he shouted, voice cracking. I'm in charge. Not him. Me. The stranger finally spoke, tone soft but firm. Being in charge and being right are two different things. Briggs flinched like the words were bullets. The customers watched, frozen, as the big officer stumbled until his back hit the wall. He pointed the baton like it was a gun, though he clearly had no intention to swing again. Stay back, he screamed. The stranger exhaled calmly. I'm not moving toward you. I never was. Briggs blinked, confused. He looked down and realized the stranger was still standing exactly where he had been. His own panic had made him retreat, and everyone had seen it. A ripple of murmurs echoed through the room. A teenage girl whispered. He backed away from a guy who didn't even touch him. Briggs's face turned scarlet. He couldn't breathe. The humiliation became suffocating. You're all against me, Briggs muttered. You're all turning on me. Over him. No, Briggs, Nora said softly, gathering her courage. We're just not blind anymore. The stranger finally sat down again, slowly, calmly, as if nothing had happened. He crossed his arms, didn't speak, didn't act superior, just watched. And that quiet confidence crushed Briggs more than any punch ever could. Who are you? Briggs yelled again. The stranger's voice was smooth, too steady for a man in danger. That's something you're not cleared to know. The room went dead silent. See cleared? Briggs stammered. Cleared? What does that mean? The stranger didn't respond. His silence said more than words ever could. And in that moment, Briggs's world tilted. He felt the abyss open under him. This wasn't a random drifter. This was someone trained, someone official, someone with authority even higher than his. He pointed a trembling finger. You can't scare me. It's not fear, the stranger replied. It's recognition. Briggs swallowed hard. His mind raced through possibilities. Military? Special forces? Federal agent? Undercover? Someone watching him? His knees weakened. You're lying, he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. The stranger reached slowly into his jacket. The entire room stiffened. Briggs nearly fainted. But what the stranger pulled out was not a gun, not a badge, not a weapon, just a napkin. He placed it on the table calmly. You told me to clean myself, he said softly. I'm doing that. The humiliation hit Briggs like a freight train. He had poured food on the head of a man who clearly held a rank far above his understanding. He had threatened him, mocked him, mistreated him in front of a dozen witnesses. And the man still hadn't touched him. That scared Briggs more than any fight ever could. Because if he had fought back, Briggs might have understood it. Violence was familiar, predictable. But this restraint, this patience, this discipline, this was the behavior of someone who was trained to win. Briggs panicked. He pressed his radio button. Dispatch, I need backup. Immediate response. Code. He couldn't even speak clearly. The dispatcher's voice crackled, confused. Officer Briggs, what's the emergency? Briggs stared at the stranger, sweat dripping down his face. He couldn't admit it, couldn't explain it, couldn't say, I assaulted the wrong man. There's a disturbance, he managed. Just send units. The stranger shook his head slowly. You're escalating something that doesn't need escalation. Briggs shouted, shut up. The stranger raised one eyebrow. You really want your entire department to watch body cam footage of this? The entire diner gasped. Briggs blinked, confused, then looked down at his chest. His body cam light was on the whole time. Recorded, documented, evidence, everything. His abuse, his threats, his meltdown. He choked on his own breath. No. The stranger leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. You should turn that off before you ruin your life. But he didn't, because he couldn't move. And then, sirens began to echo in the distance. The room tensed again. The stranger stayed motionless. Briggs whispered shakily, "Just tell me. Who are you?" The stranger finally lifted his gaze fully, eyes sharp enough to cut steel. His voice dropped low. "I'm the man your department was warned about. If you were the stranger, would you reveal your identity now, or wait until the backup arrived?" The sirens grew louder, swirling like a storm closing in on the diner. Blue and red lights pulsed against the windows, flashing across faces filled with dread and anticipation. Briggs stood frozen, palms slick with sweat, body trembling. He looked less like an officer and more like a man awaiting judgment. The stranger hadn't moved, still seated, still calm, still watching. The quiet dominance radiating from him made everyone feel like they were standing in the presence of someone far beyond ordinary authority. The front door burst open. Two officers, Morales and Jensen, stepped in with hands on their holsters. Unlike Briggs, they were professionals, disciplined, alert, scanning the room fast. "Officer Briggs," Morales said sharply. "What's the situation?" Briggs swallowed, chest heaving. His tongue felt glued to the roof of his mouth. He couldn't answer. The stranger spoke instead. "There is no situation," he said smoothly. "Just a misunderstanding." Morales turned to him, assessing his calm posture, his composed demeanor, and the mess of food on his jacket. Jensen's eyes narrowed. "Sir, were you assaulted?" The stranger didn't answer outright. He simply glanced at Briggs. Briggs flinched visibly. Morales and Jensen both noticed. "Briggs," Morales asked, voice hardening. "What happened here?" Briggs stammered. I was questioning him, and he what?" Morales snapped. "Assaulted you? Threatened you?" Briggs opened his mouth, but no words came out. He couldn't lie. His body cam was still rolling. Everyone stared at him, even the stranger. Finally, Briggs muttered, "I may have overreacted." "Overreacted," Jensen repeated. "You called for backup like it was a code red." Briggs' face turned beet red. I didn't know who he was." The diner went silent. Morales straightened. "What do you mean?" Briggs pointed shakily at the stranger. He's someone dangerous. Look at him. Dangerous?" The truck driver scoffed. He didn't even stand up. Nora crossed her arms. He sat there quietly while Briggs dumped food on him. Jensen's jaw tightened. "You did what?" Briggs stuttered. He wasn't cooperating. He was eating," Nora shouted. The room erupted in whispers and anger. Morales clenched his fists. "Briggs, step outside." "No," Briggs yelled, panic flooding his voice. "You don't get it. He's someone high level. Someone we weren't supposed to mess with." Jensen stared at the stranger. "Sir, can you identify yourself?" The stranger leaned back slowly. He didn't pull out a badge. He didn't announce a title. He didn't move with any sense of urgency. Instead, he folded his arms and said quietly, "Before I answer that, I need to know something." Morales raised an eyebrow. "What's that? Are you asking as professionals?" His voice dropped lower. "Or to cover up your colleague's mistake?" The room stiffened. Jensen spoke first, firm and unwavering. "As professionals." The strangers studied their faces, measuring integrity, assessing intent. Then he nodded once. "Good." He reached into his jacket slowly. Everyone held their breath. He withdrew a black leather wallet, thick, worn, and stamped with a small, gold federal emblem. Briggs made a choking sound. Morales stepped closer. "Is that?" The stranger flipped it open. The diner gasped. On the left side, a hard photo ID with a steel gray background. On the right side, the unmistakable gold shield. Jensen's eyes widened. "No way that's..." The stranger's voice cut through the silence. "I'm Special Agent Steven Senko, FBI, Special Investigations Unit." Briggs immediately collapsed onto a stool, face drained of all color. Morales exhaled, stunned. "Sir, we had no idea." "You weren't supposed to," Steven replied. "That's why I'm undercover." He closed the badge slowly, deliberately. "Until your officer," he glanced at Briggs, decided to escalate a harmless situation into a civil rights violation. Briggs whimpered like a cornered animal. I didn't know. I didn't know who you were. That's the problem, Stephen said calmly. You treat people based on who you think they are, not who they are. Every word struck Briggs like a hammer. Morales clenched his jaw. Sir, what do you want us to do? Stephen wiped a bit of dried gravy from his jacket sleeve. I want accountability. Briggs trembled. Please. I didn't mean. I was just. Stephen raised one hand, silencing him instantly. No excuses. You abused your position. You threatened an unarmed citizen. You humiliated him in public. Briggs broke into tears. His badge suddenly felt like a curse hanging from his chest. Jensen spoke softly. Agent Senko, do you want to file an official report? Stephen looked around the diner, at the frightened customers, at Nora clutching her apron, at Briggs practically collapsing. He took a slow breath. I want this handled correctly. By the book, he said. But I also want you, all of you, to understand something. He looked at Briggs. Respect isn't demanded by a badge. His voice hardened. It's earned by behavior. Briggs lowered his head, sobbing into his hands. Morales nodded grimly. We'll take it from here. Stephen stood up slowly for the first time. The entire diner fell silent. He wasn't just tall. He wasn't just imposing. He carried the gravity of a man who had seen darkness and come back stronger. He adjusted his jacket. Let's step outside, he said to the officers. But as he turned toward the door, one customer whispered, he fainted when he found out. Another murmured, not just an FBI agent, but Stephen Senko, the man from the task force. And Briggs? His knees buckled. He hit the floor, out cold. The diner erupted in gasps. Officer Briggs lay flat on the diner floor, unconscious, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights like a fallen piece of armor. The room hovered in stunned silence. Stephen Senko, the man Briggs had mocked, assaulted, and humiliated, now stood tall, wiping the last streak of food from his jacket as Morales and Jensen knelt beside their disgraced colleague. Jensen tapped Briggs's shoulder. Briggs, can you hear me? Briggs, nothing. He actually fainted, Nora whispered, hand covering her mouth. I've never seen a grown man drop like that. He fainted when he found out he was dealing with Stephen Senko, the truck driver muttered. Can't blame him. Morales stood up, face stiff with embarrassment. Agent Senko, he said, will call paramedics. And internal affairs will be notified immediately. Stephen nodded once. No triumph. No arrogance. Just controlled focus. Good, he replied. Make sure the body cam footage gets preserved. A murmur rippled through the customers. Briggs had dug his own grave. The camera he forgot to turn off had captured everything. The food dumping. The threats. The panic. The humiliation. Jensen clicked the body cam off carefully. Agent Senko, do you want to press charges? Stephen paused. Everyone leaned in. Nora whispered, he should. The truck driver said, throw the book at that bully. Stephen slowly shook his head. Not yet. Everyone stared. Consequences, Stephen continued, should teach, not destroy. Jensen and Morales exchanged confused glances. Stephen stepped closer to them. You too, he said. I've watched this town from a distance. Most officers here are honorable. You do your jobs professionally. But Briggs? His gaze dropped to the unconscious man. He believes a badge gives him dominance, not responsibility. Morales nodded grimly. We know, we've filed complaints. But the chief keeps giving him second chances. That ends tonight, Stephen said. The door opened, and 2 EMTs rushed in with a stretcher. What happened? Officer fainted, Morales replied. They lifted Briggs carefully onto the stretcher. His face was ghost pale, mouth slightly open. Stephen stepped back, giving them space. The diner watched him, not with fear, but with deep, stunned respect. Once Briggs was rolled out, Stephen turned to the diners. I need to speak to all of you, he said. The room quieted instantly. Stephen placed his hands on the back of the chair he'd been sitting in. I didn't come here tonight to expose anyone. I wasn't here to investigate this diner or any of you." His voice was calm and steady, but carried weight. "I was passing through. Just a man having dinner." He glanced toward the door where Briggs had been taken out. But people like him, they don't see a person. They see a target, a threat, a story they invent inside their head. Nora's eyes filled with tears. The truck driver clenched his jaw. Stephen continued, "I've met officers who'd risk their lives to protect strangers. Officers I trust with my own life. But I've also seen men who wear the uniform because it shields their insecurities." He looked directly at Morales and Jensen. "The difference lies in character, not rank." Jensen nodded slowly. "We'll make sure he faces the consequences." Stephen studied their faces, the tension, the concern, the shame they felt for their colleague. "You two handled this professionally. You listened. You didn't escalate. Remember that when the paperwork gets heavy." Morales exhaled, relieved. Stephen turned back to the crowd. "And as for all of you, thank you." The diners blinked, confused. You stayed calm. You didn't encourage violence. You didn't let it turn into a riot. He picked up his jacket and slipped it over his shoulders. That says a lot about this community. Someone near the back raised their hand timidly. "Agent Senko, why didn't you fight back earlier? Why didn't you stop him when he poured food on you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Stephen paused, thoughtful. "Because," he said slowly, "strength isn't measured by how quickly you can hit back, but by how long you can hold yourself back." The room fell silent. Even the humming AC seemed to pause. "If I had reacted with force," he continued, "we wouldn't be having a calm conversation right now. There'd be injuries. There'd be chaos. There'd be accusations. And Briggs would have walked away claiming I was the threat." A diner whispered, "He's right." Stephen's eyes softened. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing." He turned toward the door. Morales stepped forward. "Agent Senko, do you want us to escort you? Or secure transport?" Stephen shook his head. "No need. I was invisible before this happened. I can be invisible again." He took one step toward the exit, then paused. "Officer Morales." "Yes, sir." "When Briggs wakes up, tell him something for me." Morales braced himself. "What should I say?" Stephen adjusted his cuffs. "Tell him I hope he learns from this, not fears it." Morales nodded slowly. Stephen gave the room a final, calm nod and pushed open the door. Cool night air swept in. People watched him disappear into darkness, quiet, unshaken, unreadable. A man who carried authority not through intimidation, but through discipline. And though the incident was over, everyone in that diner knew. The real storm was still coming. Briggs would face investigations. Body cam footage would leak. Internal affairs would come knocking. And Stephen Senko? He would simply vanish back into the shadows. Until the world needed him again. By the next morning, Milford was no longer a quiet, forgotten town tucked between highways and cornfields. It was the center of a storm that no one saw coming. It started with one upload. A teenager who had recorded the entire diner incident posted it online with the caption, "Cop poured food on a man, then fainted when he found out who he was." Within minutes, the video exploded across social media. Millions watched as Officer Briggs dumped food over the stranger's head. Millions watched as the stranger stayed calm, silent, unshaken. Millions watched as the other officers arrived, and as the man finally revealed his identity. Special Agent Stephen Senko, FBI, Special Investigations Unit. Comments poured in like a flood. "This is what restraint looks like. That cop should never wear a badge again. Stephen Senko is a legend. Protect people like him. Remove people like Briggs." By afternoon, news channels were replaying the footage nonstop. FBI agent harassed in diner. Officer suspended. Agent's calm response goes viral. Who is Stephen Senko? The quiet man behind a loud message. Every outlet wanted an interview. Every reporter wanted answers. Every commentator praised Stephen's discipline and criticized Briggs's abuse of authority. But Stephen Senko? He was nowhere to be found. Just as he promised, he vanished back into the quiet shadows he worked from. No interviews, no statements, no fame chasing. His silence only made him more respected. Meanwhile, the consequences for Officer Briggs came swiftly and heavily. Internal Affairs arrived in Milford within 24 hours. The body cam footage sealed his fate long before he woke up in the hospital. He faced immediate suspension, a full misconduct investigation, mandatory psychological evaluation, a pending recommendation for termination. When Briggs watched the viral video himself, he broke down again, not from embarrassment this time, but from realizing how deeply he had failed the oath he swore to uphold. His badge no longer felt like a symbol of authority. It felt like a weight he didn't deserve to carry. Back at the diner, customers returned not to eat, but to talk about that night. Nora wiped tables while reporters knocked on the windows begging for interviews. The truck driver retold the story like a folk legend. People asked questions over and over. Was he really that calm? He didn't raise his voice at all. He just stood there. And every person who had been there said the same thing. He didn't fight. He didn't yell. He didn't hurt anyone. And that's what made him powerful. It wasn't the badge. It wasn't the title. It wasn't the FBI emblem. It was his self-control. Later that night, Morales and Jensen pulled up outside the diner. They weren't there for official business. They were there because they needed to talk, not as officers, but as human beings. Nora poured them coffee. Jensen stared out the window. You know, I've been doing this job 8 years, he said quietly, and I've never seen someone handle a situation like that. Morales nodded. Briggs picked a fight with the wrong man. Not because he was FBI, but because he was decent. They sipped their coffee in silence. Nora leaned on the counter. Do you think he'll ever come back? Morales shook his head. Men like him, they don't return for applause. Jensen added softly. They return only if there's someone else who needs saving. Across the country, and soon across the world, people began sharing the final clip of Stephen's closing words at the diner. Strength isn't hitting back. Strength is knowing you don't have to. It became a quote printed on posters, shirts, and motivational pages. A reminder that power isn't proven through force, but through restraint. By the end of the week, the video surpassed 100 million views. Celebrities, athletes, activists, and public figures all reposted it. Parents showed it to their kids. Teachers used it in classrooms. And people everywhere repeated the message. Respect isn't demanded. Respect is earned. And even though Stephen Senko disappeared once again into the work that kept him hidden, one thing became certain. He hadn't just humbled a bad cop. He had inspired the world.